ARCHICAD 12 we can opt to display two different views concurrently in any model or layout window. The active content, which is the actual model or drawing you are currently working on, and the trace reference, which is placed alongside, on top, or underneath the currently active content. This acts as kind of a underlay, making it easier to compare multiple model views or drawings on the same screen. Typically we can use anything on our model window for a trace. We can use a section, elevation, interior elevation, a 3D document, floor plan, detail, worksheet, and in the layout window we can use the layout or the master layout. There's a couple of different ways to access trace and reference. Currently we have this docked right here. What we'll do is we'll close that out for now. And we can go up here to trace icon and then go down to trace and reference and click, and that'll reappear below our navigator once it's been previously docked. We can also go into Windows, Palettes, Trace and Reference, and for right now we're going to put this up here. In earlier versions of ARCHICAD, Trace and Reference was known as Ghost, and it was much simpler. But in versions 11 and 12, now we have a much more functional way of working with our trace and reference, and it's fully realized its potential. Once we have trace and reference active, this little icon here will turn trace on or off. With it off, our info boxes down here are grayed out, and with it on, we've restored our functionality. Previously in ARCHICAD, with the Ghost story, we had a choice to select either above current story or below current story. But with our new trace and reference functionality, we can go in and, for instance, say right click on a section and select that as a trace reference by clicking on Show as Trace Reference, and now that section elevation will become available to us as a trace reference. Alright, now that that's finished generating, we can see the section 1 elevation is now the reference. So the reference is whatever in this dialog box. Right now we have section elevation selected, but we could go back to above current story as we're on the ground floor now, or below current story if we had a story below. And these buttons here give us some options for the reference. We can go with the original color, or we can choose from a variety of colors. For instance, if we were to select red, that will turn our reference red. Go back to original color. If we go to our active window, we can use the original color, a uniform color, or select a preset. We can turn everything on the active view blue and everything red in the reference color to make it easier to differentiate between the two. We have a slider bar here which will fade in and fade out the reference, and same thing with the active view. Alright, so let's take a look at some of these other icons up here on our palette. If I click this one right here, this is the switch reference with active. Alright, now that that's regenerated, we can zoom into our front elevation and say select an object, and now you can see that we can work on the model in this view, and this view is inactive. So let's go back on that. Okay, now that that's regenerated, this button here will allow us to drag the reference and put it in another location. We'll undo that. Now you can see that the second floor plan is the active plan and our front elevation is the reference. If we switch, now you'll see that section 1 is highlighted and now section 1 is active. This button here will allow us to rotate the reference. And this button will allow us to reset to the default position, and this button here is the rebuild. So if we have a view selected, we can rebuild it. We also have some options down here, which is to temporarily displace the reference. So with that selected, we can select our reference, move it over temporarily, and then click again with our mouse and it'll go back to its original position. Alright, I've switched the active with the reference layer, and now I'm going to select below current story, and by selecting this button here we can switch which layer is on top. So we'll zoom in a little bit and we'll see how that works. Going back and forth between the two. This button here gives us opportunity to show and hide the splitter. Now if we have this button selected, you'll notice these little splitter bars here, which is like turning a page. We can pull this page off and easily determine whether things are lined up or not. We have one on all four edges of the page, so we can go in any direction. Now this feature is really fantastic if we're working with consultants' drawings and say we want to bring in a site plan from our surveyor, either his DWG or a scan, whatever. We can drop that down onto a worksheet, and we can pull up our worksheet as a reference, and then we can size it properly, trace over it, and then we can very easily use the various features in trace and reference to make sure that everything is placed correctly. Another functionality that would be worth noting, I've opened up section 10 and I've created a detail 01 with a detail tool. And if we open up that detail, I've put a little wallpaper cover fill right here. And now we have trace and reference turned on. And if we click here, you'll notice that ARCHICAD recognizes that this detail is coming from section 10. If we put our splitter on, so we go to section 10, and there you can see, using the splitter or the fader bars, we can check to see if our details are still in line with the model. One other thing worth noting is this button right here, which makes fills and zones transparent. If you look here, you'll see that by indenting this button, we can make the fills transparent. Another thing worth noting, if we have a building that's several stories, say we're on the first floor, we're in the floor plan view now, and we click here, we'll have several options. Of course, as in previous versions, we've got above and below current story, but we also have previous story. So if you're on a multi-story building, say 5 stories, and you switch from story 1 to story 3 and have previous story activated, when you're on story 3, you'll see the previous story, story 1, as your reference. If you're on 3 and then you go to 5, then you'll have your 5th story active, and you will show your 3rd story as a reference. So that's another interesting button to work with, and you can see that there could be some very valuable applications for that as you're working through your project. Alright, another thing worth noting as far as printing, we can fade in our ghost story or reference story to whichever degree we'd like, and then if we want, we can print that. We can go into File, Print, and here we can click Print Reference, and then we can print it. Of course, I probably want to fit that to the page, but then we can print the reference as we see it here on the screen as a check print.